Chapter 13. Even school can't hurt October. It being prohibition in those days, I had no way of knowing what brown October ale tasted like, but there were a passel of other things to recommend the month. I'm not referring to school and wearing shoes again, because by October you'd got used to about 6 hours of torture and your feet had quit hurting. October meant a lot of things to me. It meant the oysters were prime again, and there was enough leaf off the trees so that you could see a squirrel. The big fish were beginning to run, and the first frost had come so that a fire felt fine in the evening. And if October were here, why then it wasn't so long before the bird season opened, and once you had Thanksgiving settled, you had Christmas practically made. It was one of those nice, bright Saturdays when it forgot to rain. Speaking of rain, did you ever notice that for 5 school days the sun always shone, but as soon as a boy got loose from learning and fixed his mouth to do something worthwhile with his time on Saturday, it always poured rain? Anyhow, this was one of those nice bright Saturdays, or promised to be, because the sun had just come up blood red and was starting to turn gold, and the first mild frost was white and stiff on the browning grass. There wasn't so much as a whisper of breeze to stir the trees. The old man had parked the Liz, and we were walking down a corduroy country road heading for a big hickory grove we knew about. We were carrying a couple of .22 rifles and were accompanied by that feist dog Jackie, the mongrel with the curled tail that swooped up in the air and came back to rest approximately between his shoulder blades. Jackie was dirty yellow and had a fox's face, and nobody could have accused him of having a hound's bugle. But there was just one thing Jackie could do better than any other dog in the world. If there was a squirrel in a tree or rooting for nuts on the ground, Jackie would know about it and tell you about it in a thin little voice that sounded like an angry woman quarreling. "We'd just tie this masterpiece of bad breeding to a tree for a spell," the old man said. "All the squirrels are still in the trees, and we don't need no expert assistance until they come down on the ground. We will still hunt 'em a spell. I reckon there's enough leaves off so we can see 'em." We came into the hickory grove. It was still as a cemetery. "A great morning for squirrels," the old man whispered. "It's a waste of time to hunt them in the wind. They just don't move, and they don't feed much. Be quiet now, and let's walk soft and go sit under that big hickory yonder and see what happens. Shh." We sat down, the old man on one side of the tree and me on the other. All over the grove you could hear the squirrels beginning to talk. Chirr is about as close as you could come to the noise they make, but you can make about the same sound by sliding your tongue sideways across the top of your mouth. There was plenty of action going on this morning, I must say. You could hear them chirring all over the grove and hear the click of their teeth on the nuts, and now and again you would hear a mild crash in the foliage as a big fellow traded trees, and the branch he sailed off of would whip back. I heard a chirr behind me on the ground and a click, and I knew it was the old man talking squirrel. He was making the click with his safety. It sounded just like a squirrel bragging about the size of the nut he was tackling. Pretty soon there was a shaking in the branches of a tree just ahead of me off to the right, and I sat still as a statue. Then there was some more shaking, and a head stuck out of a crotch. All I could see was a head, and it was black silver, and it had to be a fox squirrel. Blimey, I saw a tail flicker, and then the old fox slid around the trunk, flat plastered to the bowl. I let him come all the way around until his back was to me, and he was peeping in the opposite direction. Then I raised the little .22 real slow, held high on his back between the shoulders, and squeezed her off. The long rifle hit with a thump, and Mr. Squirrel came down like a rock. He hit with a thud, kicked a couple of times, and quit. A soft-nosed .22 long rifle between the shoulders will make a man stop and think, let alone an old squirrel. From where this fellow lay, he looked as big as a tomcat. He was near solid black on top, with a lovely black and gray tail, and he was almost 3 times as big as a gray, or what we called a cat squirrel. It wasn't long before I heard a rustling behind me, then a wait, and the old man's little gun spat. I heard a thump as something hit the deck, and judged the old man's gun eye was still working. The old man making his chittering noises, the squirrels came to that big hickory like they were cats, and we had the catnip concession. First my gun would make its little splat, followed by my tunk as the bullet hit, and blump as the squirrel came tumbling down. There were mostly grays, but I acquired 2 more of the fox variety, one a lovely silver gray, and the other blacker than the first. The old man's gun was speaking pretty consistent too, and in less than an hour we had more than a dozen. Then I heard the old man creak to his feet and heard the rasp of a match as he fired up his pipe. Let's pick up and move on. We done wore out our welcome here. How many you got? He asked. 7, I told him. 3 foxes and 4 cats. How about you? I got 8, the old man said, but only 1 fox. I missed another. I could have killed with a rock if I had a rock instead of this cannon. I missed 3, I explained. I got fancy and tried to hit one jumping, and the other 2 I could have caught with my hands. A squirrel looks like a mighty big target when he's flattened out or sitting up, don't he? We had a couple of tow sacks with us, and I filled mine with my squirrels. Then I went around to where the old man had stacked his squirrels in a neat pile and dumped them on top of mine. 15 squirrels in 1 sack is a powerful mess of squirrels. It was all I could do to heft the bag. Give me, the old man said. I'll just hang it up here in this low crotch, which you go let Jackie loose. It don't do to frustrate a dog any more than you'd tease a young'un. He's been hearing the gun go off, and he's probably hung himself by now. We could still use a lot more squirrels. I promised a mess to half the neighborhood, and at last count, Aber McCoy had at least 14 head of young'uns to feed, and the boll weevils hit the cotton this year. I grinned. The old man was powerful cute sometimes. Abner McCoy was as black as the ace of spades, and he had a mouth as big as a scoop shovel. He farmed a lot of land next to the store, and he had more quail than anybody around. About a dozen fat squirrels would make a prime bait of meat for his family, and there would be enough heads left over for a proper squirrel head stew. The squirrels would fix our hunting lease for another year. There may have been a limit on squirrels in those days, I just remember, but we didn't hunt 'em much, and when we hunted serious. So I rested my gun on my hat and tottered off to unleash Jackie, who was having a fit of nervous frustration and was foaming at the mouth. He nigh dragged me off my feet as we headed back to the grove. Turn him loose now, the old man said. We'll go over yonder to that rise where all the scrubby oaks and chinkapins are. The survivors will be on the ground. That's Jackie's business. Jackie took off in the right direction, and presently we heard his squirrel up a tree signal, a feverish yapping that would make you think he'd treed a panther or a bear at least. He was standing under an oak. Did I say standing? He was dancing an Irish reel and yipping his head off, with his sharp fox face pointed to the heaven. You take that side, the old man said. I'll take this. In a minute, one of us will spot him. Shooting treed squirrels is almost ridiculously simple. It is just a matter of knowing how to look for them. With 2 men to a tree, the squirrel who is plastered to the trunk or squatting in a crotch or stretched full length on the branch will move away from one side as soon as he's aware of the shooter on his side. That's when the guy on the other side shoots him. Pretty soon I spotted a head sticking cautiously around the bowl, and a gray body stuck flat eased around to my side. The little 22 talked some more, and down he came. Jackie raced over, picked him up by the back of the neck, gave him a sharp twist, and broke his neck. Then Jackie spat him out on the ground, barked a sharp bark of self-appreciation, and whipped off. It went on like that until nearly 11 o'clock. I reckon Jackie must have netted us over 24 squirrels, mostly cats, but at least 6 or 7 more foxes. We filled the other bag, and it was so heavy that the old man ran a stick through a couple of holes in the hem, and we packed it out together. When we got to Abner's, the old man dumped the first bag in Abner's clean, white-sanded front yard. Abner's vast, plump, black face split in a grin as big and red as half a watermelon. Man, that show a beta squirrel, Abner said. What in the yonder crock sack? More squirrels, the old man told him. These 15 are for you. Boss man, that powerful neighborly. You can use some meat in this house. Seemed like every day I count another young'un I didn't know us had, and the price of sowbell powerful high. Tell you what us best do, Abner said. Dat too many skull into yonder sack for 2 people clean. I call my biggest chillin', and We set right down here and skin 'em all. Now, you chillun, come on, help me and the cap'n." Children of all sizes boiled from the little house. "You, Woodrow Wilson, you go fetch the knives," Abner ordered. "You, Hardin, you go tell Mama I said that the fire and boil water in the hog killing pot. You just make it to sit in the shade, Cap'n, under that chinkyberry tree, while while the children fix the school. And if I ain't out of my station, Cap'n, maybe you like a little snort of something I found in the branch last week, and the young Cap'n, maybe he like cool a throat with a little dipper of Scuppernong wine, Yeti." The old man said he couldn't think of a sounder idea. We sat in the shade, and Abner brought a half-gallon mason jar full of white liquid and a similar jar half full of a darker liquid. The white liquid was sweet and cool from the well, and the brown liquid must have had plenty of muscles in it, because the old man closed his eyes and his body contorted when he downed a dipperful. He wiped his mustache with the back of his hand. "How are the birds this year, Abner?" he asked. "Never seen so many partridges in my life," Abner replied. "City man out here the other day won't pay me for hunting rats, but I tell him I save my birds for my white folks." The old man looked at me and winked. It wasn't long before our 24 squirrels, skinned, gutted, and washed, came pink and clean in the tow sack. "I guess we better get on, Abner, and many thanks," the old man said. "Goodbye." Abner said goodbye, and the children waved. The old man drove slowly out of the yard. He turned and winked at me again. "There's more ways to kill a cat than to choke it to death on butter. I reckon you all think I'm powerful concerned with food because I'm always writing about it. I guess I've got to plead guilty, but it seems to me a boy lives mostly in his belly, and the old man said one time he didn't trust nobody that didn't like to eat so hearty that a nap was bound and necessary after Sunday dinner. In those days, we didn't have all the fancy outdoor barbecue rigs, with the host wearing a girl's apron and a chef's cap. Mostly what got cooked was cooked inside a house on a slow-burning wood stove on a slow cooking colored lady who didn't want nobody messing around her kitchen. The men didn't cook. At least the men didn't cook public in town. But the sneaky spirit of the chef was always there inside the hairiest of the roughnecks, and Christmas was a time of year when everybody who wasn't sweet as a peach, a southern Southport euphemism for being as drunk as a goat, was apt to be doing something in the woods or on the water. It was a kind of point of honor to go somewhere to spend a couple of days living off the land. They still have them in my part of the South, but they've got a lot fancier now, and I'm talking about the old-fashioned oyster roasts. A roast was as much a part of the festive season as the Christmas tree, the hollyberry, and the mistletoe. In those outdoor cooking sprees, the men mostly took over. The ladies had their hands floury enough from making the fruit cakes, and they just sort of sat back, patted a foot, and let the boys be boys. First thing the boys did was go out in a skiff and tong up a bait of oysters and clams. The oysters in that neck of the woods were mighty fine. They were big as a bar of laundry soap, gray, striated, and shading to white around their wrinkled edges. The clams were nearly as big as tennis balls, purple-black on the shell and plum-yellow solid globe on the inside. They came up muddy from the cold gray water, and when you swished the tongs in clean water, they tumbled onto the deck of the boat, shining bright as jewels. The fruits of the sea were taken to a proper oyster shed, which meant a lean-to under which a rough wooden table perched on trestles. The chairs were anything from camp stools to packing boxes. Kerosene lamps provided the light. I forgot to say that no respectable oyster roast was held in the daytime. It was not considered polite to get drunk in the daylight, and a good portion of our holiday makers considered oysters and corn liquor inseparable. Wet down moss would do, but a really top-grade oyster chef smothered his oysters in freshly gathered kelp. The actual oven was a simple compromise on a modern barbecue apparatus, meaning that 3 sides of stone or concrete held a sheet of heavy tin or galvanized iron on top. Slow fire was built under the sheet metal, and the oysters, blanketed in seaweed, were allowed to steam until the hinges relaxed and you could slide an oyster knife between the shell lips without cutting the valve. The smell is still vivid to me because the oyster roast was held close by salt marsh, the scent of marsh and myrtle and beach pine mingling with the steam from the roaster. You were supposed to tee off with either clam chowder or terrapin stew. You never got both at the same event. If it was clam chowder, it was very simple. The chowder contained no milk or tomatoes. It had clam juice and clams and diced Irish potatoes and brown fatback and onions and salt and pepper, and it simmered into such a delicious symphony that you had to hold yourself back, remembering the oysters. One of the ladies generally bestirred herself to make the chowder, for the men were always very busy with the oysters and with the half-gallon fruit jars that contained a white beverage, which was known simply as mule. But the oysters were the main operation. The chowder just paved your stomach for the real debauch. I don't care how they eat oysters today, there's only one way. As the old man said sometimes, I value your opinion, but not when I know better. And in this case, I know better. First, you take a bushel of oysters, smoky steam writhing from their bed in the kelp over the slow coals, and you introduce them to a small Negro boy who's standing on your right with an opening knife in his hand. In front of you, on the rough pine planking of the table, is a bowl of red-hot melted butter and a wide, empty plate, almost platter-sized. For a condiment, there is a thin-necked jug of pepper vinegar, with the little curled-up red peppers, hot as Hades, still inside. There's a platter full of Johnny cake, corn dodgers, or even hush puppies in front of you. For a beverage, you drink Bevo, a concoction that was supposed to taste like beer, but wanting a little needle to gain authority. At the signal go, the colored boy starts to open oysters, and if you are a man of control and high purpose, you will allow him to release a dozen before you start to dip them in the butter, season them with the pepper vinegar, and put them away, mopping up that gravy of oyster juice, butter, and marsh mud with the already greasy Johnny cake, corn fritter, or hush puppy. Somehow, the tiny bit of remaining mud gives a flavor that is incomparable to anything, unless you know exactly what a Carolina marsh smells like with the wind in your nose and the water oaks shivering before the wind. You then lick your fingers and look reprovingly at the little boy if he has not managed to liberate another dozen oysters during your complete concentration on the first 12. The old man used to say, there ain't no such thing as enough oysters. It's just that the human stomach was never really designed to handle a decent bait of them. My best record was 4 dozen, each oyster as big as a candy bar. It was possible, of course, for a man to open his own oysters, but you lost something of glamour in the process, for the small boy was as much a part of the roast as the odor of steaming seaweed and smell of the sea and trees and a scent of the roasting oysters as they reluctantly relax their valves under the steady pressure of the flame. You might as well have taken away the distant hoot of the owl and the hollow boom of the surf and the damp smell of the white beach sand or the rustle of the sea oats that grew down on the dunes nearly to the water's edge. There was another thing, 2 things as a matter of fact. One was that a man opening his own oysters never had enough willpower to unleash a dozen before diving into the butter. The other thing was that you robbed a little colored boy of a chance to bet their night's wages on which client could eat the most oysters. A man who was having his oysters shucked for him was duty-bound to founder himself, or it would cost his little assistant a mess of money, as much as 50 cents. The boys kept the shells as a tally. They rarely lost money backing my appetite. There's a certain artistic elegance to this scene of gourmandizing, the firelight red on the already flushed faces of the cooks, glistening off the white eyeballs and black faces of the little Negro boys, shining greedily on the lips and the fingers of the eaters, lighting up the rough shed with weird shadows and making weirder shadows of the angular, wind-tortured trees. The road to the roast was always of gleaming crushed oyster shell, which seemed fitting, and there was a bone-white, high-piled stack of shells off to the side. This was the co-educational outdoor aspect of the holiday time. The more intimate and cruder cookery by the gentlemen came on the 2 or 3 day hunting trips. Some of the richer men, off after ducks or deer, took along a cook. At that time there was a profession among the Carolina colored folk that possibly no longer exists. More's the pity, that of sporting cook. He would be a man of the approximate moral equal of his employers, which is to say, he wouldn't work steady if there was an excuse in the world to run loose in the woods and listen to that fine man talk. Generally, he drank intemperately, sporadically, and was so adjudged a poor risk as a house cook. I knew several of these fellows, and the best of them all was a paroled murderer who worked occasionally for my family. The name has gone away, but he was wizard in the woods. He did some things with a few rocks and an iron grill, shoved some oak chips underneath with hard hickory to flavor it, and the venison chops that came off the grill would make you cry. Venison is a hard meat to cook, and a lot of people spend a lot of time basting it with this and that and undrying it with jellies and wines, but this fellow would just toss it in the coals, haul it off, and slap it steaming on the plate. You always burned your tongue because you couldn't wait. I used to go to bed full as a tick, already thinking about breakfast the next morning. Breakfast would be something special in fried eggs. He always taught it in an iron skillet because he said you couldn't fry anything, so a dog would eat it in anything else but an iron spider, and usually some broiled deer liver and slabs of fried buttered bread, and maybe, if everybody was hungry, a squirrel fricassee. He made hoe cakes, which are nothing but hush puppies, meal and water and salt cooked in ashes. You scraped off the ashes, and there is a noble one-bite piece of ecstasy, especially if you've got some red-eye ham gravy or fatback flavored pot liquor to dip it in. I have never liked any egg in any form in a restaurant, but a fried egg in the wood, sizzled in bacon fat until its white edges turned to fine Belgian lace, grating up to brown, is a noble thing. And if it is accompanied by fried sow belly and busted into a plate of fine ground hominy grits and a whole mess flavored up with grease, there may be indigestion around the corner, but it's not worthy of worry. A lot of people won't eat possum because it looks like a rat, but our cook could take a possum and nestle it in sweet taters and a little onion and a few carrots, and I've never eaten anything in Paris, France that could touch it. It wasn't fat and it wasn't lean. It was kind of blend of both. Remembering back to eating in the woods, it seems to me that the main staple apart from coffee and sugar and salt and stuff was corn syrup or molasses. A can of beans slow cooked with molasses and onions and strips of bacon quit being just pork and beans. We used the long sweetening for everything, to sweeten coffee, drown the hot cakes, help the beans. We even combined it with ketchup on the spaghetti. There are worse things than a duck or a fish caked in clay and set to slow cook until the clay cracks. When you peel it off, the feathers or scales come with it. There are worse things than a chunk of fresh killed deer liver broiled on a green stick around a campfire. Nobody has yet found a way to commercialize creek water with its taste of brown leaf dye, but certainly there is no comparable liquid for making coffee in a tin percolator in a nest of coals. Of course, you realize all this was a very long time ago, and memory tends to make a man salivate. Youth and a body unjaded by whiskey and tobacco are part of it, and of course the excitement of being out of doors. The only thing I can't figure out is when I do it today, it still tastes as good as I remember it, and very possibly a little better. The first real concept of conservation that crawled into my head was fed me gradually by the old man without his ever saying anything much about it. It took a period of years to develop, but one day it came into bloom like an autumn rose bush. There are a lot of things mixed up with keeping your game supply up to standard, some things that even a millionaire can't buy, such as friendship and cooperation. Like most boys, I was as bloodthirsty as a cannibal. I got my first air gun when I was just 6 years old, and the robins and blue jays and the catbirds and the rain crows really took a pounding. I shot everything from English sparrows to the neighbor's cat. When we had nothing better to do, my cousin Roy and I went into the woods and played Indians and shot each other from ambush. Why somebody didn't lose an eye will always be a source of wonder to me. A big old sassy mocker lived in the magnolia tree alongside our house, and he used to sing late at night in the moonlight. He would scatter those notes around like one of the fishermen on Saturday night payoff. He was a pet of my grandmother's, so it was natural that when I took down the daisy one day and removed him from the concert business, the old man took down my pants and applied a very limber lath to my behind. It was one of the few times I ever had a hand laid on me, and it made an impression. Hunting, the old man said when my noise had slacked off, is the noblest sport yet devised by the hand of man. There were mighty hunters in the Bible, and all the caves where the cavemen lived are full of carvings of assorted game the head of the house drug home. If you hunt to eat or hunt for sport for something fine, something that will make you proud and make you remember every single detail of the day you found him and shot him, that is good too. But if there's one thing I despise, it's a killer. Some blood-crazy idiot that goes around bam-bamming it at everything he sees. A man who takes pleasure in death just for death's sake is rotten somewhere inside, and you'll find him doing things later on in life that'll prove it. I realize all youngins get that first phase when they want to carve up desks and bust windows and shoot mockingbirds, but I aim to see you grow out of it, or I'll have every last inch of hide off your rear end. I went to school. I want you to go to bed tonight and stay awake thinking about the mockingbird that sung so pretty and your grandma loved. And then think of that little mess of dirty feathers even the cat didn't want. Then think a little bit about this nice air rifle that Santa Claus brought you to learn to shoot with and wish you had it back again. Whereupon the old man took the little daisy and busted it over his knee and threw it over into the bushes where he had thrown the carcass of the mockingbird. That was lesson 1. I went quite a spell before I got my first shotgun, and when the old man took me out to learn to shoot quail, he spent quite a time reading me the riot act about how many quail a man could shoot out of a covey and still have some quail left to shoot next year and a year after. Like most kids, my idea of what to do once you got birds scattered pretty had been to shoot as long as the dogs pointed. That sank in pretty good because those quail and the old man had been friends for a long time because he trained dogs over them and knew to a bird what came out of the spring clutches. I didn't want him busting up my 20 gauge like he did the daisy, and since he was my pretty constant companion in the woods, I couldn't have cheated if I wanted to. We hunted for quite a few years before it dawned on me that we had exclusive shooting rights to nearly a whole county, or to a whole county. We shot land that said strictly posted, but we shot it with the owner's permission. We always started out with a word with the farmer, black or white, in his backyard, and always had a long, cold drink of icy well water out of the tin dipper. And when we came in, tired, and reached the house, we went in to warm chapped hands by the farmer's fire. Then maybe the old man would have a glass of Scuppernong wine, and I would have a little bit too, and a handful of cookies or a donut before we got in Liz to drive home. This applied to both white and black. The colored folks were generally landowners, not croppers, and they had a big pride of land. I do not know how many little clapboard or log shacks I've been inside with a roaring pine knot fire actually showing through the house, the yard full of pickaninnies and yellow feist dogs, with some old woman always doing something over an iron pot in the yard, scalding a hog, doing the clothes, but always doing. When we went inside to warm up, the house was always neat and clean, with the walls papered and colored pages from newspapers, calendars, or sometimes just newspapers. Outside, the white sand yard was always swept clean. I had my first taste of squirrel-head stew in one of those little colored folks' houses, my first possum and sweet taters. I still love the taste of fatback fried hard and stewed rabbit. To me, tastes sweeter than any of those fancy French dishes. I called the older folks aunt and uncle, and the middle folks by their first names. They called the old man Cap'n, and called me young Cap'n or Mr. Bobby. There wasn't any special servility, because the old man was always laughing and joking, and they always made a lot of fun of me, all loaded down with canteen and scout axe and a gun as long as I was. Old Aunt Florence, grizzled and bent, would sometimes say, "Cap'n, strange city man come out here the other day with some bud dogs, and he'd drive up and ask me if I got any buds on my place, and I say, 'No, sah, ain't seen a single bud since dem big rains come last spring and drowned 'em all. Anyhow, this place posted. We got too many hogs loose in the woods. I knowed you wouldn't like no strange passer-bys shooting your buds. I sont 'em off.' Aunt Florence's little farm was so surrounded by coveys of quail on purely public property that she practically had to build a fence to keep them out of the yard, but the only way to the big timber leaseholds and swamps was through her yard, and she look pretty fierce surrounded by dogs that yap ferociously at strange white folks. Or we'd stop to pay a call on big Abner McCoy, who was 6'4" and had all those young'uns. Abner would grin horribly over his gums and say, "Cap'n, stay away from that covey over by the old church. There's a den of foxes over there been eating up your buds and my chickens. And I got traps set thicker than pine needles. Wouldn't like none of your dogs to get caught." But the other day I was cutting some kindling over by that old graveyard between the graveyard and the old sawdust pile, and I jumped the biggest covey of buds I ever seen. These is new buds. Must been using to cross the road where that logging going on, and plain couldn't stand the commotion, so they come live with us. Wait a minute, I finished this chore. I come show you exactly. We never wasted any time finding birds, whether we were hunting on Sheriff Knox's big farm or Aunt Mary Millet's, who did the washing. Either the birds were here or they were there. If they weren't here, they had to be there. And if you found them from one year to the next. We had pea-field birds and swamp birds and woods birds that roved a little to eat the pine mast, but usually centered around a certain scrub oak grove or a sawdust pile or a core of galberry and dead branches. What is more, we had the whole county, a big county, to hunt in, and only one large estate was off limits. The rest was private shooting for the old man and me. One day it suddenly struck me that no millionaire could own that much prime shooting. There must be a reason for it. Well, there were a lot of reasons for it. For one thing, country folks in those days had no interest in quail unless they caught a covey running down a corn row and could kill the whole caboodle for a stew. Or maybe to trap a few when times were tough and bellies growling. So they never paid any attention to partridges, which is what we used to call the bobwhite, and never made any effort to help them survive or to keep people from just killing off whole coveys right and left. There were pot hunters in those days, dead-eyed gents with pump sawed-offs who could wipe out a covey in a day if the birds scattered right in the broom sage. The old man was pretty devious, as always. Everybody in the county knew him. He was in a position to give credit at a feed and grain store he was connected with, and in the hard years a lot of people planted on credit and fed their cows on credit and got their laying mash on credit. The old man could be counted on for $1 or $2 worth of personal loans, and at Christmas time he always went around with a flivver full of oranges and red candy. He had what are known today as connections at the source. Well, when we started to circulate the idea among his friends that he thought right high of those little speckled partridges that ran together in droves and called to each other so mournful at dusk, he got action. He would tell one farmer that it'd be a nice idea if he planted just a few black-eyed peas down by the swamp, or another if he'd let some stock stand here and there after the harvests, or not plow that field of broom over to the west if he didn't really need the space that year. He said he'd give 2 shotgun shells for every tame cat gone wild that anybody brought him the tale of, and the same for hawks and foxes and similar varmints. He said he'd kind of appreciate it if the folks would keep account about where they flushed the coveys oftenest, so he'd know where to go look for them. In return, he was a sort of game scout, rounding up lost hogs and strayed cattle, and he was a terror about fire in the piney woods. Anytime he came across a coon or a possum, you'd shoot it out of the tree and fetch it along to the nearest family. He usually had a few tins of snuff for a plug of apple tobacco in his hunting coat for the old folks. Well, sir, the upshot was that we had the primest shooting land around, and we had it pretty much to ourselves, and we had friends all over the place who looked after our game and kept down the brush fires and planted a little extra for the birds to eat. We had fires to warm us and cold water to drink and whatever there was in the pot to eat if we were hungry. A long time later I read about conservation, but it seems to me the old man had it tapped a long time ago. The only thing was, he didn't believe in sharing the wealth with every Tom, Dick, and Harry, only his friends and me, because he could control us. The old man reckoned that those birds were his birds and not for non-appropriate short-time murderers to shoot into extinction. The more I look around at the opportunities for good shooting today, the more I think he might have been right on all counts.